The dust never settled in Willow Creek, Montana territory. It hung in the air like unfinished business, coating everything in a fine layer of memories and regret. It was the kind of place where secrets traveled faster than the morning stage, where a woman's tears were louder than thunder, and where an 8-year-old girl could carry the weight of the world on shoulders too small for such burdens. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lucy Williams pressed her face against the cracked window of the general store, watching the tall man in the worn leather hat load supplies onto his wagon. His movements were careful, deliberate, like someone who understood that everything had value and nothing should be wasted. She'd been watching him for weeks now, studying the way he touched the brim of his hat when he passed ladies on the street, how he always paid Mrs. Henderson exactly what he owed without argument, and most importantly, how he never once raised his voice or made anyone flinch. Her mama had been flinching a lot lately, especially when Sheriff Morrison came around with his heavy boots and heavier words. Lucy didn't understand all the grown-up talk about debts and foreclosures and what was proper for a woman alone. But she understood the sound of quiet, sobbing that drifted through the thin walls of their homestead every night after the oil lamp went out. The cowboy finished loading his wagon and turned toward the store entrance. Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. This was her chance. She smoothed down her faded blue dress, the one with the careful patches that Mama had sewn with thread that didn't quite match, and positioned herself directly in his path. The morning sun painted Willow Creek in shades of gold and amber, but there was no warmth in the light that filtered through the dusty windows of the Williams homestead. Emma Williams stood at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers that might as well have been death sentences. Each one bore the stern letterhead of the territorial bank, each one demanding what she didn't have to give. Her calloused fingers traced the numbers that refused to add up in her favor. 2 years since Thomas died, 2 years of fighting a battle she was slowly losing. The fawn that had been his pride, their dream, was slipping away like water through broken fingers. She'd sold the good horses, the extra land, even her mother's wedding ring, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The sound of small feet on the wooden floor made her quickly fold the papers and force a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lucy appeared in the doorway, her dark hair hanging in tangles around a face that looked too serious for her 8 years. She carried her cornhusk doll, the one Thomas had made for her last Christmas, clutched against her chest like a shield. "Mama, are we going to lose the farm?" Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through Emma's heart like a blade. Emma knelt down to her daughter's level, smoothing the wild hair with gentle fingers. "Don't you worry about grown-up things, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine." But Lucy had her father's eyes, sharp and knowing, and she saw through the lie as easily as looking through glass. "I heard you crying again last night." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth that Emma couldn't deny. She pulled Lucy close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, trying to find words that wouldn't shatter what was left of her daughter's innocence. "Sometimes grown-ups cry, Lucy. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It means something's wrong," Lucy said with the stubborn certainty of childhood. "And I'm gonna fix it." Before Emma could ask what she meant, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard made them both freeze. Emma's stomach dropped as she recognized the deliberate pace of Sheriff Morrison's stallion. She'd been expecting him, dreading him, knowing he'd come back with his persistent offers and veiled threats disguised as concern. "Lucy, go to your room," Emma said, her voice tight with tension. "But Mama—" "Now, sweetheart, please." Lucy reluctantly obeyed, but Emma knew she'd be listening from the top of the stairs. The child had become too familiar with the sound of adult conversations that weren't meant for her ears. Sheriff Frank Morrison filled the doorway like a thundercloud, his badge catching the morning light with an arrogance that made Emma's skin crawl. He was a large man, Not fat but thick through the shoulders and chest, with hands that had never known honest work and eyes that lingered too long on places they shouldn't. "Emma," he said, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Hope I'm not intruding. What do you want, Frank?" He stepped inside without invitation, his boots loud on the floorboards. Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? Especially one who's been looking out for your interests? Emma kept the table between them, her hands gripping the edge until her knuckles went white. "Looking out for my interests? Or your own?" Morrison's smile was cold as January wind. "Can't they be the same thing? I've been thinking about our last conversation, about your situation. Time's running out, Emma. Bank's getting impatient. I'll find a way to pay them." "With what?" "You've got nothing left to sell except the land itself, and we both know that's not enough to cover what you owe." He moved around the table, closing the distance between them. "But there's another way. You know there is." Emma backed toward the wall, her heart racing. "I've told you, Frank, I'm not interested in your proposal." "My proposal?" Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Emma, darling, I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you. You marry me, and all your problems disappear. The debt, the foreclosure, the whispers in town about poor Emma Williams and her bastard child. Don't you dare." Emma's voice was barely controlled fury. "Don't you dare speak about Lucy that way. The truth hurts, doesn't it? People are talking, Emma, about how you're raising that girl without a man's guidance, about how you're failing as a mother, just like you failed as a wife." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to wound, to break her down until she had no choice but to accept his twisted version of salvation. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, not in front of him, never in front of him. "Get out," she whispered. "I'll give you one more week," Morrison said, putting his hat back on. "One more week to come to your senses. After that, I won't be able to help you anymore. Bank will take the farm, and you'll have nothing. Nothing except what I'm generous enough to offer." He paused at the door, looking back with false sympathy. "Think about Lucy, Emma. Think about what's best for her. A girl needs a father, and I'm willing to provide that. Don't let your pride destroy her future." The door slammed behind him, leaving Emma alone with the silence and the weight of impossible choices. She sank into her chair, the tears finally coming, hot and bitter and full of rage she had nowhere to direct. Upstairs, Lucy pressed her ear to the floor, listening to the sound of her mother's breaking heart. She'd heard enough of these conversations to understand what Sheriff Morrison wanted, even if she didn't understand why. What she did understand was that her mama was running out of time, running out of hope, running out of reasons to keep fighting. But Lucy wasn't out of ideas. Not yet. Later that afternoon, while Emma worked in the garden with the desperate energy of someone trying to outrun their thoughts, Lucy slipped away. She'd been planning this for days, working up the courage, practicing the words in her head until they sounded right. The walk to town seemed longer than usual, each step carrying her further from the safety of home and closer to the scariest conversation of her young life. Jake Thompson was loading feed sacks onto his wagon when Lucy approached, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. He was taller than she remembered, with kind eyes beneath the brim of his hat and hands that moved with gentle purpose. Everything about him seemed solid, dependable, the opposite of Sheriff Morrison's threatening presence. "Excuse me, mister," Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked down, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "Well, hello there, little miss. You're Emma Williams' girl, aren't you?" Lucy nodded, suddenly tongue-tied. This was harder than she'd imagined. How did you ask a stranger to save your whole world? "Is everything all right?" Jake asked, setting down the feed sack and giving her his full attention. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You look like you've got something mighty important on your mind. I do, Lucy said, finding her voice. It's about my mama. Jake's expression grew serious. What about your mama? Lucy took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. She cries every night, mister. Every single night since Papa died, and it's getting worse. Sheriff Morrison keeps coming around, and he makes her scared, and she thinks I don't know, but I do. I know everything's wrong, and I don't know how to fix it except, she stopped, the words tumbling over each other in her haste to get them out. Except what, sweetheart? Lucy looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for her age. Except maybe if she had someone good to take care of her. Someone who wouldn't make her cry or be scared or worry about losing the farm. Jake knelt down to her level, his voice gentle. That's a lot of worry for someone your age to be carrying around. Please, mister, Lucy said, tears starting to fall. Please marry my mama. I know it sounds crazy, and I know you don't even know us, but she's good and kind, and she works so hard, and she deserves someone who'll be nice to her. Someone who won't hurt her like Sheriff Morrison wants to. The words hung in the air between them, innocent and desperate, and heartbreaking in their simplicity. Jake Thompson had faced down stampeding cattle and wild horses, had weathered storms and droughts and all the hardships that came with life on the frontier, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of a little girl begging him to save her mother. Lucy, he said softly, that's not something you should be worrying about. That's not your job. But it is, Lucy cried. Because if I don't do something, Sheriff Morrison's going to make her marry him, and she'll be even sadder than she is now, and I can't let that happen. I can't. Jake felt something shift inside his chest, something that had been sleeping for too long. He'd noticed Emma Williams around town, had seen the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispers and the stares. He'd seen the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held her daughter's hand like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to hope. Your mama know you're here talking to me about this. Lucy shook her head, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. She'd be mad if she knew. She doesn't like to ask for help. But mister, I don't know what else to do. I've tried everything else. Jake studied the child in front of him, seeing the desperation and love that had driven her to this moment. In her tear-streaked face, he saw something that reminded him of his own younger sister, lost to fever years ago. He saw courage that humbled him, and a love so pure it made his chest ache. What's your name, little one? Lucy Williams. Well, Lucy Williams, you're about the bravest person I've ever met. And your mama is lucky to have someone who loves her as much as you do. So you'll think about it? About marrying her? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing. He'd lived alone for years, content with the solitude and the simple rhythms of ranch life. But looking at Lucy, thinking about Emma's quiet strength and the way she'd held herself together, despite everything working against her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose, direction, the possibility of something bigger than himself. I'll tell you what, he said finally. I'll think about it. But more than that, I'll think about how to help your mama, whether that's marrying her or finding some other way. Will that be enough for now? Lucy's face lit up like sunrise. You mean it? You really mean it? I mean it. But Lucy, you can't tell your mama about this conversation. Not yet. There are things I need to figure out first, grown-up things. That take time. Can you be patient? Lucy nodded eagerly, hope blooming in her chest for the first time in months. I can be patient. I can be the most patient person in the whole territory. Jake smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. I believe you can. Now you'd better get home before your mama worries about where you've gone. As Lucy ran back toward the homestead, her heart lighter than it had been in months, Jake Thompson stood in the dusty street watching her go. He'd made a promise to a child, but more than that, he'd made a promise to himself. Emma Williams might not know it yet, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone willing to fight for her, someone who understood that sometimes the most important battles were the ones fought for other people. The sun was setting over Willow Creek, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. For the first time in 2 years, the Williams homestead might see a dawn that brought more than just another day of struggle. It might bring salvation. Wrapped in the quiet strength of a cowboy who'd just learned that sometimes the most unexpected requests came from the purest hearts. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, Emma Williams dried her tears and tucked her daughter into bed, not knowing that the answer to her prayers might be closer than she'd ever dared to hope. The morning came too soon and not soon enough. Emma Williams had spent another sleepless night staring at the ceiling, counting the days until Sheriff Morrison's deadline while her mind churned through possibilities that led nowhere. 7 days. She had 7 days to find a miracle or accept a fate that felt worse than death. Lucy was unusually quiet at breakfast, picking at her cornmeal mush with an abstracted air that might have worried Emma if she hadn't been drowning in her own troubles. The child kept glancing toward the window as if expecting something, a nervous energy radiating from her small frame that made Emma wonder what schemes were brewing in that active mind. "Mama," Lucy said suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled over their meager meal. "Do you think Papa would want you to be happy?" The question caught Emma off guard, a spoonful of mush halfway to her mouth. "Of course he would, sweetheart. Your Papa wanted nothing more than for us to be happy and safe. Then why don't you try to be happy anymore?" The innocent question hit like a physical blow. Emma set down her spoon, searching for words that wouldn't shatter what remained of her daughter's faith in the world. How could she explain that happiness felt like a luxury she couldn't afford, that every moment of joy felt like betrayal of Thomas's memory? "Sometimes happiness takes time to find again," Emma said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have to work very hard just to keep going, and happiness has to wait." Lucy considered this with the serious expression she'd worn too often lately. "But what if happiness was trying to find you, and you were too busy being sad to notice?" Before Emma could respond to this startling wisdom from an 8-year-old, the sound of wheels on dirt interrupted their conversation. Emma's heart sank, expecting Sheriff Morrison's familiar heavy tread, but the footsteps that approached the door were different, lighter, more hesitant. The knock, when it came, was gentle, respectful, nothing like Morrison's demanding pounds that seemed to shake the whole house. Emma opened the door to find Jake Thompson standing on her porch, hat in his hands, looking almost as nervous as she felt surprised. He was cleaner than she'd ever seen him, his hair combed back and his best shirt pressed, though she could see the careful mends in the fabric that spoke of a man who took care of his possessions. "Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that made something flutter in her chest. "I hope I'm not disturbing your morning." "Mr. Thompson." Emma was acutely aware of her own appearance, the worn dress with its careful patches, the flour dusting her hands from the morning's baking. "What brings you out this way?" Jake glanced toward Lucy, who was watching from the kitchen doorway with barely contained excitement, then back to Emma. "I was wondering if I might speak with you about a business proposition." Emma's guard went up immediately. She'd heard too many business propositions lately, all of them designed to take advantage of her desperation. "I'm not sure I understand. May I come in? What I have to say might be better discussed inside." Against her better judgment, Emma stepped aside. Jake Thompson had never given her reason to fear him, and there was something in his manner that suggested genuine concern rather than the predatory interest she'd grown to expect from men. Jake entered the small kitchen, his presence somehow making the room feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He nodded politely to Lucy, who beamed at him with an enthusiasm that puzzled Emma, then turned his attention back to her. "Mrs. Williams, I'll speak plain because I believe you're a woman who appreciates honesty. I know you're facing some difficulties with the farm." Emma's face flushed with embarrassment. Of course he knew. Everyone in Willow Creek knew about her troubles. The whispers followed her wherever she went, a constant reminder of her failures and vulnerabilities. "I don't need charity, Mr. Thompson. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering partnership." The word hung in the air between them, strange and unexpected. Emma had braced herself for pity, for condescension, for the kind of help that came with strings attached. Partnership was something else entirely. "I don't understand." Jake sat down at her invitation, his hands resting on the worn wood of her kitchen table. "My ranch is doing well, but it's a lot of work for one man. I could use help with the books, with managing the household, with planning for the future. And I know you're educated, that you helped your husband with all aspects of running this place." Emma's mind raced, trying to find the trap in his words. "You're offering me employment?" "I'm offering you marriage." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that seemed to shake the very foundations of Emma's world. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard, certain this was some kind of elaborate jest. "I beg your pardon?" Jake's cheeks reddened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I know how it sounds. We barely know each other. But hear me out before you refuse." Emma sank into the chair across from him, her legs suddenly unreliable. "I'm listening. A marriage of convenience. A partnership based on mutual benefit and respect. You'd have security, a home, protection from those who might take advantage of your situation. Lucy would have stability, a future, a chance to grow up without worry. And I have someone I could trust to help build something lasting. And what would you get out of this arrangement?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Jake was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving to Lucy, who was pretending to wash dishes while obviously listening to every word. "A family, a purpose beyond just accumulating cattle and land. The chance to make a difference in the lives of people who deserve better than what they've been dealt." Emma felt tears threaten, but these were different from the bitter tears of desperation she'd grown accustomed to. These felt dangerous, full of hope she couldn't afford to embrace. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't accept charity disguised as marriage. It wouldn't be fair to you. Who says it's charity?" Jake leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Mrs. Williams, in the past year I've watched you fight battles that would break most men. I've seen you hold your head high when others would have crumbled. I've seen you sacrifice everything for your daughter's welfare. Any man would be lucky to have a partner with that kind of strength and character." "You don't know me," Emma protested. "You don't know my failures, my weaknesses, the mistakes I've made. I know enough. I know you're honorable. I know you're hardworking. I know you love your daughter more than your own life. Everything else we can learn as we go." Emma stood abruptly, moving to the window where she could see the fields Thomas had worked, the dreams they'd built together now withering under the weight of debt and despair. "What you're suggesting, it's not a real marriage. It's a business arrangement." "It would be whatever we made it," Jake said quietly. "I'm not asking for love, Mrs. Williams. I'm asking for partnership, for respect, for the chance to build something good together. If more than that develops over time, well, that would be a blessing. If not, we'd still have created something worthwhile." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. Sheriff Morrison's deadline loomed like a storm cloud, dark and threatening. This offer from Jake Thompson felt like sunlight breaking through, almost too good to believe. "And Lucy?" she asked. "What role would she play in this arrangement? She'd be my daughter in every way that matters. I'd provide for her, protect her, make sure she has every opportunity to become the remarkable woman she's clearly destined to be." Lucy, unable to contain herself any longer, rushed to Emma's side. "Mama, he's nice. He's really nice, and he doesn't yell or make scary faces like Sheriff Morrison. And he's got horses, Mama. Real beautiful horses." Emma looked down at her. Daughter, seeing hope blazing in those dark eyes for the first time in months. Lucy, how do you know about Mr. Thompson's horses? Lucy flushed, realizing she'd revealed more than she intended. I just seen them in town, Mama. Everyone knows he's got the finest horses in the territory. Jake caught Emma's suspicious glance and felt a moment of panic. He couldn't betray Lucy's confidence, couldn't reveal that this entire proposal had been sparked by a little girl's desperate plea. But he also couldn't lie to the woman he was asking to trust him with her life. Mrs. Williams, he said carefully, what matters isn't how this conversation came about. What matters is that it's happening, and it's giving us both a chance to consider possibilities we might not have thought of otherwise. Emma studied his face, seeing something there that made her think there was more to this story than he was telling. But she also saw honesty, kindness, and a strength that felt different from Sheriff Morrison's bullying dominance. This felt like the kind of strength that protected rather than conquered. You'd really do this? She asked. Take on a widow and her child, assume the burden of our debts, ask for nothing in return but partnership? I'd be honored to do it, Jake said simply. The question is whether you'd be willing to trust me enough to try. Emma looked around the kitchen where she'd spent so many happy hours with Thomas, where they'd planned their future and raised their daughter and believed in dreams that seemed foolish now. This house held all her memories of love and loss, but it also held her failures and her fears. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. But Mrs. Williams, if you're worried about Sheriff Morrison's deadline, I want you to know that. I'm prepared to help regardless of your decision about marriage. No woman should be forced into anything against her will. The quiet steel in his voice when he mentioned Morrison made Emma look at him with new eyes. Jake Thompson might be soft-spoken and gentle-mannered, but there was something in his posture that suggested he could be formidable when protecting something he cared about. Why would you do that for us? Jake stood, settling his hat back on his head. Because it's the right thing to do. Because Lucy deserves to grow up feeling safe and loved. Because you've earned the right to make your own choices without being bullied into submission. After he left, Emma sat in her kitchen feeling as though the world had tilted on its axis. An hour ago, she'd been facing the choice between Sheriff Morrison's unwanted advances and losing everything she had left. Now she was contemplating marriage. To a man who offered respect instead of dominance, partnership instead of ownership. Lucy climbed into her lap, snuggling close with the easy affection of childhood. Do you like him, Mama? Emma stroked her daughter's hair, breathing in the sweet scent that always reminded her of hope and innocence. I think he's a good man, sweetheart. Better than Sheriff Morrison? Much better than Sheriff Morrison. Then why do you look so scared? Emma considered the question, trying to find words an 8-year-old could understand. Sometimes, when something seems too good to be true, it's hard to believe it really could be true. Sometimes we're scared to hope because hoping hurts when things don't work out. Lucy pulled back to look at her mother's face. But Mama, what if it is true? What if hoping works this time? That afternoon, Emma found herself walking the boundaries of the farm, following the fence lines that Thomas had built with his own hands. Every post, every rail carried memories of their shared dreams. They'd planned to expand, to buy more cattle, to build a bigger house where they could raise more children. Death had stolen those dreams, leaving her with nothing but echoes and empty spaces. But standing in the field where Thomas had taught Lucy to ride, where they'd picnicked on summer Sundays, Emma realized something that surprised her. The land itself didn't feel like Thomas anymore. It felt like a museum of the past, beautiful but lifeless, preserved but not living. Jake Thompson's offer wasn't about preserving the past. It was about building a future. Not the future she'd planned with Thomas, but a different future, one that might honor his memory by allowing his daughter to thrive instead of merely survive. That evening, as Emma tucked Lucy into bed, her daughter asked the question that had been hovering between them all day. Are you going to marry him, Mama? Emma smoothed the quilt that had been her own grandmother's, thinking about generations of women who'd faced impossible choices and somehow found the courage to choose hope over fear. "Would you want me to?" Lucy nodded eagerly. "He's got kind eyes, Mama, like Papa did. And he doesn't make you flinch when he talks." The observation was so astute, so painfully accurate, that Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Her 8-year-old daughter had noticed things Emma thought she'd hidden, had seen the way she tensed whenever Sheriff Morrison appeared, the way fear had become her constant companion. "If I did marry him, things would change. We'd move to his ranch, live in a different house. Are you ready for that kind of change?" "Mama," Lucy said with the solemn wisdom that sometimes emerged from her childish chatter, "things are gonna change anyway. Sheriff Morrison's gonna make sure of that. At least with Mr. Thompson, the changes might be good ones." Later that night, Emma sat on her porch listening to the familiar sounds of the farm settling into darkness. The crickets sang their eternal song, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. These sounds had comforted her through 2 years of grief and struggle, but tonight they sounded different. Tonight they sounded like a goodbye. She thought about Jake Thompson's hands, work-roughened, but gentle when he'd handled his hat. She thought about his voice, quiet but strong, offering partnership instead of domination. She thought about the way he'd looked at Lucy, not with the calculated assessment of a man weighing burdens, but with the warmth of someone who genuinely liked children. Most of all, she thought about the choice he was giving her. Real choice, not the illusion of choice that Sheriff Morrison offered. The freedom to say yes or no without consequences designed to force her hand. For the first time in 2 years, Emma Williams allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't revolve around mere survival. She imagined waking up without dread, raising her daughter without fear, building something new on the foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. It wasn't the love story she'd lived with Thomas, but it was something else. Something that might, in time, become its own kind of beautiful. As the stars emerged overhead, brilliant and infinite, Emma made her decision. Tomorrow she would give Jake Thompson her answer. Tonight she would allow herself to hope that sometimes, just sometimes, salvation came wearing a worn cowboy hat and offering partnership instead of pity. The last thing she heard before falling asleep was the sound of her own breathing, steady and calm for the first time in months. It was the sound of a woman who had stopped running from the future and started walking toward it. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Willow Creek, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that promised a day of reckoning. Emma Williams stood before her cracked mirror, braiding her hair with fingers that trembled slightly despite her resolve. Today she would give Jake Thompson her answer, and with it, chart the course of her future and Lucy's. She had chosen her best dress, the deep blue wool that Thomas had bought her for their 3rd wedding anniversary. It was well mended but dignified, and wearing it felt like carrying a piece of her old strength into this new chapter. Lucy bounced on the bed behind her, chattering with an excitement that suggested she somehow knew what decision her mother had reached. "Mama, you look pretty as a picture. Mr. Thompson's gonna think you're the finest lady in all of Montana Territory." Emma turned from the mirror, smoothing her skirts with nervous hands. "Lucy, you must understand that if I accept Mr. Thompson's proposal, it won't be like the fairy tales in your storybooks. This will be a practical arrangement, a partnership. There won't be grand romance or declarations of love." Lucy tilted her head with this serious expression that made her seem far older than her years. "But Mama, maybe the best kind of love grows slow, like the good apples on Papa's tree. They don't ripen fast, but when they do, they're sweeter than all the rest." The wisdom in those words took Emma's breath away. Sometimes her daughter seemed to understand truths that adults spent lifetimes learning. Perhaps Lucy was right. Perhaps the love that grew from respect and partnership could be stronger than the passionate romance of youth. The ride to Jake's ranch took them through country Emma had traveled countless times but which seemed transformed this morning. The rolling hills stretched endlessly under the wide Montana sky, golden with autumn grass and dotted with cattle that moved like dark clouds across the landscape. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest, the kind of land that demanded everything from those who tried to tame it, but gave back abundance to those willing to work with its rhythms rather than against them. Jake's ranch house came into view as they crested the final hill, and Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. It was larger than she'd expected, built of local stone and timber that seemed to grow from the land itself. The barn was well maintained, the fences straight and strong, and everywhere she looked she saw evidence of a man who took pride in his work and built things to last. Jake emerged from the barn as their wagon approached, and Emma noticed immediately that he too had taken special care with his appearance. His shirt was freshly pressed, his hair combed back, and he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who understood the importance of this moment. "Mrs. Williams, Lucy," he said, helping them down from the wagon with gentle courtesy. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having us," Emma replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Jake led them toward the house, but Lucy hung back, her attention caught by something else entirely. "Mr. Thompson, are those your horses?" Emma followed her daughter's gaze to the corral where 3 magnificent horses stood watching their approach with intelligent eyes. They were beautiful animals, well fed and obviously well cared for, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. "They are indeed," Jake said, his face lighting up at Lucy's obvious admiration. "Would you like to meet them?" Lucy looked to her mother for permission, and Emma nodded, understanding that this delay might be exactly what she needed to calm her nerves. They walked to the corral fence, where the horses approached with friendly curiosity. "This is Sage," Jake said, gesturing to a gray mare with a gentle disposition. "She's got the sweetest temperament of any horse I've ever known. And this big fellow is Thunder, though he's much calmer than his name suggests. The black mare there is Midnight." Lucy climbed onto the lower rail of the fence, reaching out cautiously to stroke Sage's nose. The mare nuzzled her palm gently, and Lucy giggled with pure delight. "She likes me." "Animals are good judges of character," Jake observed, glancing at Emma. "Sage doesn't take to just anyone." Emma watched her daughter with the horses, seeing a joy there that had been absent for too long. Lucy belonged in this place, with these animals, in this environment where children could run free and grow strong. The realization strengthened Emma's resolve about the decision she'd already made. "Shall we go inside?" Jake asked softly. "I think we have important things to discuss." The interior of Jake's house surprised Emma with its warmth and attention to detail. The furniture was well made but not ostentatious, the floors clean, but lived in, and everywhere she looked she saw evidence of a man who valued comfort over display. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, with a large table that seemed designed for family meals and important conversations. Jake poured coffee from a pot that smelled rich and welcoming, his movements betraying a nervousness that somehow comforted Emma. He was as uncertain about this conversation as she was, which made him seem more human and less intimidating. "I've thought about your proposal," Emma began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. And Jake's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "Before I give you my answer, I need to understand something." "Why me? You could have your choice of women in this territory. Young women without complications or debts or children to consider. Why would you choose to burden yourself with a widow's troubles?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it might provide the words he needed. When he looked up, his eyes held a sincerity that made Emma's heart skip. "I've been alone for a long time, Mrs. Williams. I built this place, made it profitable, accumulated everything a man is supposed to want. But somewhere along the way, I realize that having everything doesn't mean much if you have no one to share it with. And as for burdens," he paused, meeting her gaze directly, "I don't see you as a burden. I see you as a blessing I don't deserve." The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest, and more moving than any flowery declaration could have been. Emma felt something inside her chest loosen, a knot of tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "There's something else you should know," Emma said, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the difficulty of the confession. "I'm not the same woman I was when Thomas was alive. Grief and struggle have changed me. I'm harder now, more suspicious, less trusting. I don't know if I'm capable of being the kind of wife you deserve." "What kind of wife do I deserve?" Jake asked gently. Emma gestured helplessly. "Someone who can love freely, who can give her whole heart without reservation. Someone who isn't broken by loss and hardened by disappointment." Jake leaned forward, his expression intense. "Mrs. Williams, I'm not asking for your whole heart. I'm asking for your partnership, your honesty, your willingness to build something together. If your heart heals enough to love again, that would be a gift I'd treasure. If not, I'd still count myself fortunate to have your respect and companionship." "And what about your heart?" Emma asked quietly. "Don't you want love in your marriage?" "I want whatever we can create together," Jake replied. "If that's love, wonderful. If it's deep friendship and mutual respect, that's wonderful too. I've seen enough marriages built on passion alone to know they don't always last. But I've also seen partnerships built on respect grow into something beautiful and lasting." Emma stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land that could become her home, at the place where Lucy could grow up safe and free. In the distance, she could see her daughter still at the corral, now sitting on the fence while Sage stood patiently beside her. "There's one more thing," Emma said without turning around. "Sheriff Morrison won't give up easily. If you marry me, you'll be making an enemy of a powerful man. He's used to getting what he wants, and he wants me to accept his proposal. He won't appreciate your interference." "Let me worry about Sheriff Morrison," Jake said, and there was something in his tone that made Emma turn to look at him. The mild-mannered rancher was gone, replaced by someone with steel in his spine and fire in his eyes. No man has the right to force a woman into marriage through threats and intimidation. Morrison might have a badge, but that doesn't give him the right to terrorize decent people. Emma felt a flutter of something that might have been relief, or gratitude, or the first stirring of trust she'd felt in a man since Thomas died. Jake Thompson might be quiet and gentle, but he wasn't weak. He wouldn't cower before Morrison's bullying or leave her to face the sheriff's anger alone. "There's something I haven't told you," Emma said, the words tumbling out before she lost her courage. "The debt against my farm, it's larger than most people know. Even if we sold everything, it wouldn't be enough to satisfy what I owe. Anyone who marries me inherits that burden." "How much?" Jake asked simply. Emma named the figure, watching his face for signs of shock or second thoughts. Jake nodded calmly, as if she'd told him the price of a sack of flour. "That's manageable," he said. "I can pay it off without compromising the ranch's security." "You would do that? Take on a debt that isn't yours?" "If we marry, your debts become my debts, just as my assets become yours. That's what partnership means." Emma sat back down, her legs suddenly unsteady. She'd expected him to reconsider, to find excuses to withdraw his offer once he understood the full scope of her financial troubles. Instead, he spoke of taking on her burdens as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Mr. Thompson," she said carefully, "I want to accept your proposal. But I need you to understand what you're getting. I'm not a young woman who will worship you or defer to your every wish. I have opinions, and I'm not afraid to voice them. I've been making decisions alone for 2 years, and I won't be comfortable being treated like a child or an ornament." Jake smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Mrs. Williams, if I wanted a woman who would worship me and defer to my every wish, I'd have looked for someone very different. I want a partner who will challenge me, who will make me think, who will call me out when I'm wrong. I want someone strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me, even when it means arguments and disagreements. Especially then. A marriage without honest disagreement is a marriage where one person has stopped thinking for themselves. I'd rather fight with you than agree with someone who's only telling me what she thinks I want to hear." Emma found herself laughing, a sound that surprised her with its lightness. "You might regret saying that when I disagree with your cattle management or question your business decisions." "I'm looking forward to it," Jake said solemnly. "This ranch could benefit from a woman's perspective, especially from someone with your experience running a farm." They sat in comfortable silence. For a moment, the weight of decision settling between them like a foundation stone being laid. Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense that she was choosing her future rather than simply enduring whatever fate handed her. "There's one more thing," Emma said. "Lucy, she's not just part of this bargain, she's the most important part. If you marry me, you become her father in every way that matters. That means discipline when needed, guidance always, and unconditional love even when she's difficult. Can you promise me that?" Jake's expression grew tender as he looked toward the window where Lucy could be seen still enchanted by the horses. "Mrs. Williams, that little girl walked up to me yesterday and asked me to marry her mother because she couldn't bear to see you cry anymore. Any child with that much love and courage already has my heart. I'd be honored to be her father." Emma felt tears sting her eyes, but they were different tears than she'd shed in recent months. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the overwhelming realization that she wasn't alone anymore. "Then yes," she said quietly. "Yes, Mr. Thompson. I'll marry you." Jake stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. "You're sure?" "I'm sure, but I have conditions." "Name them." "We take time to get to know each other properly before the wedding. I won't marry a stranger, even one as kind as you appear to be. And we're honest with each other from the start. No pretending to be something we're not. No trying to be the perfect husband and wife. Just two people doing their best to build something good together." "Agreed," Jake said without hesitation. "Anything else?" "Lucy comes with me when I visit my husband's grave. That's not negotiable." "Of course. Thomas was her father, and you were his wife. Honoring that memory is important for both of you." Emma stood and extended her hand, surprised by how steady it felt. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Thompson." Jake took her hand in both of his grip warm and firm and reassuring. "We have an agreement, Mrs. Williams, and please call me Jake." "Emma," she replied. "My name is Emma." Outside, Lucy had convinced Sage to take an apple from her palm, and her delighted laughter carried through the window like music. It was the sound of a child who felt safe, who saw possibilities instead of problems, who believed in happy endings. Emma looked at Jake Thompson, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been afraid to voice, and allowed herself to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, happy endings were possible after all. Word traveled fast. In Willow Creek, faster than wildfire and twice as destructive. By the time Emma and Lucy returned from Jake's ranch, the news of their extended visit had already made its way through the general store, the saloon, and every front porch where gossips gathered to dissect their neighbors' lives. Mrs. Henderson was waiting on Emma's porch when they arrived, her sharp eyes bright with curiosity and something that might have been concern. She was a woman who wore her nosiness like a badge of honor, always the first to know everyone's business and the last to keep it to herself. "Emma, dear," she called out as they climbed down from the wagon, "I heard Jake Thompson paid you a visit yesterday, and now you've been out to his place all morning. People are starting to talk." Emma felt her shoulders tense, but she kept her voice level. "People always talk, Mrs. Henderson, usually about things that aren't their concern." "Now, don't be like that," Mrs. Henderson said, following them toward the house. "I'm just looking out for you like any good neighbor would. You know how it looks, a widow woman spending so much time with a bachelor, especially with Sheriff Morrison being so attentive to your welfare." Lucy tugged on Emma's skirt, her face troubled. "Mama, why is Mrs. Henderson mad at us?" "She's not mad, sweetheart," Emma said, though her own patience was wearing thin. "She's just concerned about things that don't need her concern." Mrs. Henderson's expression sharpened. "Emma Williams, you mark my words. Sheriff Morrison won't take kindly to competition, especially from some drifter who thinks he can waltz into town and steal what rightfully belongs to others." "Jake Thompson is not a drifter," Emma said firmly. "He's been ranching in this territory for years, building something honest and substantial. And I don't belong to Sheriff Morrison or anyone else." "You know what I mean," Mrs. Henderson pressed. "Morrison's been courting you proper, following all the right protocols. It would be a shame if you threw that away for some romantic nonsense about a handsome cowboy." Emma felt anger rising in her chest, hot and protective. "Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate your concern, but my personal affairs are exactly that, personal." "Well," Mrs. Henderson sniffed, clearly offended by the dismissal, "I suppose you'll do what you think best. But don't say I didn't warn you when Morrison comes calling with questions about your new friendship." After Mrs. Henderson left, Emma sat at her kitchen table with her head in her hands, the weight of small-town judgment pressing down on her shoulders. She'd expected gossip, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly it would spread or how ugly it would become. Lucy climbed into her lap, wrapping small arms around her mother's neck. "Mama, are we doing something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Emma said, holding her daughter close. "We're not doing anything wrong. Sometimes people talk about things they don't understand, and that's their problem, not ours." But Mrs. Henderson seemed really upset. Emma sighed, struggling to find words that would protect Lucy's innocence while preparing her for the reality they'd face. Some people think they know what's best for everyone else, even when it's not their business. "Mrs. Henderson thinks Sheriff Morrison would be a good husband for me." "But you don't want to marry Sheriff Morrison," Lucy said with the straightforward logic of childhood. "No, I don't. And that's my choice to make." That evening, as Emma prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, she found herself thinking about Jake's offer to help regardless of her decision about marriage. The kindness in that gesture stood in stark contrast to the possessive pressure she felt from Morrison and the judgmental interference from neighbors like Mrs. Henderson. The sound of hoofbeats in the yard made her stomach clench with familiar dread. She recognized the heavy rhythm of Sheriff Morrison's stallion, the deliberate pace that announced his presence like a threat. Emma quickly sent Lucy to her room, not wanting her daughter to witness whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Morrison didn't bother to knock. He pushed through the door with the presumption of ownership, his face dark with an anger that made Emma's blood run cold. "So," he said without preamble, "I hear you've been entertaining Jake Thompson." Emma forced herself to remain calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Good evening, Frank. As usual, you're well informed about things that don't concern you. Don't concern me?" Morrison's voice rose dangerously. "When the woman I intend to marry is carrying on with another man, it concerns me plenty." "The woman you intend to marry?" Emma's own anger flared. "I don't remember accepting your proposal, Frank. In fact, I remember quite clearly refusing it." Morrison moved closer, backing her against the kitchen counter. "You're confused, Emma. Grief has clouded your judgment. But I'm patient. I'm willing to forgive this momentary lapse in good sense." "There's nothing to forgive," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm a free woman, and I'll associate with whomever I choose." "Free woman?" Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Emma, You're drowning in debt, about to lose everything you have left. You're not free. You're desperate. And desperate people don't have the luxury of choice. Emma felt tears of frustration sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I have more choices than you think, do you? Morrison's hand slammed against the counter beside her head, making her jump. Because I've been talking to the bank, Emma. I've been talking to the territorial judge. I've been talking to people who have the power to make your situation much worse than it already is. What are you saying? Morrison's smile was cold and predatory. I'm saying that if you continue this foolish association with Thompson, you'll find that your creditors become much less patient. You'll find that the judge becomes much more interested in the welfare of children whose mothers can't provide proper homes. You'll find that your options disappear one by one until you have no choice but to accept my generous offer. The threat was clear, and Emma felt ice forming in her veins. Morrison wasn't just threatening her financial security. He was threatening to take Lucy away. It was a threat with real teeth, given his position and influence in the community. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. I would do anything to keep you from making a decision that could destroy both our lives, Morrison said, his tone laced with insincere concern. Emma, you're not thinking straight. Thompson is taking advantage of your situation. When he's had his fill, he'll disappear, and it'll be Lucy who pays the price. Jake isn't using me, Emma replied, though her voice wavered with doubt. Morrison's words had struck a nerve, stirring up fears she'd been trying to ignore. Isn't he? Morrison pressed. Why would a wealthy rancher want a grieving widow and her illegitimate child? What do you have to offer him that he couldn't get from any single woman around here? Each word landed like a blow, calculated to break her spirit. Emma felt herself shrinking under the weight of his accusations, her newfound hope fading. Fast, you have 1 week, Morrison said, stepping back. 1 week to accept my proposal. After that, I can't protect you from what'll happen. When he was gone, Emma collapsed into a chair, trembling. She knew Morrison wasn't bluffing. As sheriff, he had the judge's ear and the respect of the townsfolk. If he claimed she was an unfit mother or implied her relationship with Jake was immoral, he could take Lucy from her. That thought was more terrifying than any financial threat. Lucy was her entire world, the reason she kept going when everything else had crumbled. But alongside the fear, anger flared. Morrison had shown his true nature, not a concerned man, but a manipulative bully who'd do anything to get what he wanted. Compared to Jake's decency and respect, Morrison's tactics looked even more repulsive. The following morning, Emma was hanging laundry when Doc Patterson arrived. His face was serious, his presence unexpected. He was one of the few people whose opinion she respected. He delivered Lucy and cared for her husband in his final days. Emma, he said without small talk, I've heard folks are giving you a lot of advice about your future. Emma paused. If you're here to lecture me about what's proper, I'm not in the mood. Actually, I came to tell you not everyone in Willow Creek approves of how Sheriff Morrison is handling things. What he's doing pressuring you, it's wrong, and it's not legal. Emma looked at him, startled. What are you saying? Morrison's been meeting with your creditors, Doc explained, his expression darkening, implying that those who cooperate with him will get favorable treatment. He's even hinting to Judge Williams that you're an unfit mother. He's laying the groundwork to take Lucy. Can he really do that? He's trying, which means he thinks he can pull it off. But Emma, you're not alone. There are good people here who won't let him get away with it. Emma felt a flicker of hope. You'd stand up for me? Doc nodded. I've seen what happens when decent people let bullies win. I was there when you gave birth to Lucy and watched you care for Thomas with strength few possess. What Morrison's doing is an abuse of power, and it endangers all of us. Emma's eyes filled with grateful tears. Thank you. You don't know what this means. I do, Doc said gently. And as for Jake Thompson, I've known him for years. He's honest and kind. If he's helping you, it's because he cares, not because he wants anything from you." After Doc left, Emma felt the weight lift slightly. She wasn't fighting alone, she had allies. People who believed in her, who saw through Morrison's manipulations. And now she felt surer than ever that Jake's intentions were sincere. That afternoon, Emma made a decision she wouldn't have dared days earlier. She dressed with care, braided her hair, and walked into town with her head high. At the bank, she asked to speak with the manager, Mr. Peterson. Nervous and clearly uncomfortable, he tried to delay the conversation. "Perhaps your advisor should be here next time," he said. "My advisor?" "The sheriff. He's been assisting with your finances. He requested to be included in future meetings." Emma's anger surged. "Sheriff Morrison has no authority over my personal finances. I speak for myself, and I'll continue to do so." Peterson, clearly relieved by her directness, nodded quickly. "Understood, ma'am. Absolutely." Emma left the bank with her confidence growing. She had taken back control. Morrison might hold sway, but she had a voice, and she would use it. Her next stop was the general store, where she paid her bill and stocked up on supplies. Though whispers followed her, she moved with quiet dignity, unfazed by the gossip. As she prepared to leave, Tom Bradley Morrison's young deputy approached her cautiously. "Mrs. Williams," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you." Emma gave a nod, curious. "I just want you to know that not everyone at the sheriff's office agrees with what Morrison's doing, using his badge to corner you. It's not right." "Thank you, Tom." "There's more," he added, lowering his voice. "Morrison's planning to arrest Jake Thompson on a false charge. Cattle rustling or causing a disturbance, something to get him out of your life." Emma went cold. "When?" "Could be tonight. Maybe tomorrow. I thought you should know. You might want to warn him." Emma thanked him and walked out, her heart racing. Now it wasn't just about herself. Jake was in danger too. Morrison's threats were escalating, becoming more desperate and more dangerous. If Jake were arrested on false charges, it could destroy his reputation and his business, regardless of whether the charges stuck. She had to warn him, but more than that, she had to make a choice. She could back down, accept Morrison's ultimatum, and save Jake from persecution. Or she could stand and fight, risking everything on the belief that justice would prevail. As Emma walked back toward her farm, her supplies clutched in trembling hands, she realized that her decision had already been made. She would not be bullied into submission. She would not sacrifice her freedom or Jake's honor to appease a corrupt sheriff's desires. The war Morrison wanted was about to begin, and Emma Williams intended to fight it with everything she had. The ride to Jake's ranch had never felt longer. Emma pushed her horse harder than she should have, driven by Tom Bradley's warning about Morrison's plans. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of urgency, and every shadow seemed to hide potential danger. Jake was mending fence when she arrived, his movements efficient and unhurried. He looked up at the sound of approaching hoofbeats, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he saw Emma's face. "What's wrong?" he asked, dropping his tools and walking quickly to meet her. "Morrison's planning to have you arrested," Emma said without preamble. "Tom Bradley warned me. False charges, probably tonight or tomorrow." Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "What kind of charges?" "Cattle rustling, disturbing the peace, anything he can make stick long enough to ruin your reputation." Emma dismounted, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fear. "Jake, this is my fault. If you hadn't gotten involved with me—" "Stop." Jake's voice was firm but gentle. "Morrison's corruption isn't your fault. His abuse of power isn't your responsibility. But it's my problem that's brought this down on you." Jake stepped closer, his eyes intense with conviction. Emma, what Morrison's doing isn't about you specifically. It's about power and control. If it wasn't you, it would be someone else. Men like him don't stop until they're stopped. So what do? We get married tomorrow. Emma stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Tomorrow? Morrison's using time as a weapon against us. He's counting on wearing you down, making you feel isolated and desperate. But if we're married, his threats lose their power. A husband can't be forced to testify against his wife, and his intimidation tactics become harassment of a married woman, which the territorial judge won't tolerate. Emma felt her heart racing. Jake, that's not how I wanted this to happen. I wanted time to know each other properly, to build something real. We'll have the rest of our lives to build something real, Jake said, taking her hands in his. Right now we need to protect what we're building from someone who wants to destroy it. That evening, Emma sat in her kitchen with Lucy, trying to explain why their carefully planned courtship was about to become a rushed wedding. Her daughter listened with the serious attention she gave to all important matters. So you're marrying Mr. Thompson tomorrow? Lucy asked. If you're comfortable with that. This affects you too, sweetheart. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then smiled with a wisdom that amazed Emma. Mama, I asked him to marry you because you were sad. If marrying him tomorrow makes you safe, then I think Papa would say that's what should happen. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the sky itself approved of the day's plans. Emma wore her best dress, the same blue wool she'd worn to Jake's ranch, and pinned her mother's brooch to the collar. It wasn't the wedding she dreamed of, but it was the wedding she needed. Doc Patterson served as witness, along with Mrs. Henderson, who had surprisingly offered her support when she understood the true nature of Morrison's threats. The ceremony was simple, conducted by Pastor Williams in the small church where Emma had been married to Thomas years before. When Jake slipped the simple gold band onto Emma's finger, his voice was steady and sure. With this ring, I thee wed, and I promise to honor and protect you and Lucy for all my days. Emma's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her vows, but her words carried the weight of genuine commitment. I take you as my partner and my friend, to build a life together based on respect and trust. The kiss that sealed their union was gentle, tentative, but filled with promise. It wasn't the passionate embrace of young love, but something deeper. A covenant, a beginning. Sheriff Morrison arrived at the church just as the ceremony concluded, his face dark with rage. He stood in the doorway like a thundercloud, his hand resting on his gun. This marriage is a sham, he declared. A desperate attempt to avoid legal consequences. This marriage is legally binding, Pastor Williams replied firmly. Witnessed and recorded according to territorial law. Morrison's gaze fixed on Emma with such intensity that she instinctively stepped closer to Jake. You think this changes anything? You think marrying him protects you? I think threatening a married woman in front of witnesses is poor judgment. For a man who claims to uphold the law, Jake said quietly. The tension in the church was palpable, but Morrison seemed to recognize that his position had fundamentally changed. Emma was no longer an isolated widow he could intimidate. She was part of a family, protected by law and community, with allies who wouldn't hesitate to speak against his abuse of power. This isn't over, Morrison said finally. Yes, it is, Doc Patterson said, stepping forward. Frank, you've overplayed your hand. The territorial judge has been asking questions about your methods. I'd suggest you focus on actual law enforcement rather than personal vendettas. After Morrison left, Emma felt the weight of 2 years of fear and desperation lift from her shoulders. She looked at Jake, this man who had become her husband to protect her, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. 6 months later, Emma stood in the kitchen of Jake's ranch house, watching through the window as her husband taught Lucy to rope cattle. The child's delighted laughter carried on the wind, and Emma smiled at the sound. Lucy had taken to ranch life with enthusiasm, and to Jake with the easy affection of a daughter who had found a father worth loving. The financial troubles that had seemed insurmountable were resolved. The farm sold to pay debts, and Emma had found her place in this new life. She managed the ranch books with the same skill she'd once applied to her own farm, and Jake consulted her on every major decision. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had grown into something deeper. Not the passionate romance of her youth, but a mature love built on respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection. They were partners in every sense of the word, building something together that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. Sheriff Morrison had been quietly transferred to another territory after a thorough investigation into his conduct. The threat that had once seemed overwhelming had dissolved like morning mist, proving that bullies only maintained power as long as good people remained silent. Emma touched the simple gold band on her finger, remembering the frightened woman who had stood in this same kitchen months ago, certain that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. That woman had been wrong. Hope wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, the foundation upon which all good things were built. Outside, Jake caught her eye and waved, his smile warm with affection. Lucy waved too, her face glowing with happiness. Emma waved back, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them all together. Sometimes salvation came in the form of a child's desperate plea to a kind stranger. Sometimes love grew slowly from respect and partnership. And sometimes the courage to hope for something better was all that stood between despair and joy. In the end, Emma Williams Thompson had learned that the strongest foundations were built not on passion or desperation, but on the simple decision to trust in the possibility of something better. And in that trust, she had found not just safety, but home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.